And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will the government's new Ukraine aid package include new antivirus software for my work laptop? And with the tragic passing of the Home Shopping Network's Marilyn Miglin, who should I look to for expertise on my favorite anti-aging cream? And now, the podcast host who never needs anti-aging cosmetics, especially when it comes to his childlike feet, Pete Dominic!
That is accurate. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Pete Coe, who just got a pie from Tom and Leslie at Noble Pies. Longtime listeners, Tom and Leslie, sending Pete a pie, a random pie, to thank him for all of his amazing introductions and jingles and more. Thank you, sir. That is right. I have very youthful-looking feet. I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. It's who I am. It's my truth. And so is this show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to it. It is Aaron Carroll Day, ladies and gentlemen. Probably one of the most popular guests here on the show. We had an amazing conversation, including a few things that weren't in his expertise, because Aaron's pretty much brilliant about everything. Also, another brilliant friend and listener, Bill B. in D.C. Bill Boyle joins me for another brilliant, thoughtful conversation about all that is happening around Putin's invasion of Ukraine. We covered a lot there. A great conversation with Bill as well. Aaron Carroll, Dr. Aaron Carroll, Bill B. in D.C. for you today. And, of course, a great big old news segment coming your way, including a good news wrap-up from my daughter Ava. Another. Very excited about that. How are you doing? How's things here on a Thursday? Will I be seeing you at tonight's hangout? You going to hang out with us tonight at 8 p.m.? If you are a stand-up with Pete Dominic listener, you get to hang out with us. It's happy hour Thursday nights at 8 Eastern. So look for the link in the email that all subscribers get. And I hope to see you tonight at 8 East.
Thank you for all the feedback that you guys have been sending. As always, my email, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And my sincerest apologies to those of you who listen late at night or early in the morning, usually when I've been posting it a little bit earlier, around 11 p.m. East. But those of you who listen as soon as I post it late at night, early in the morning, I'm sorry I didn't get it up at the same time. Yesterday was a great day, but I was exhausted. About halfway done, woke up early, out here in the solar-powered shed to finish it up and have it, hopefully, to you by 7 a.m., is usually the case if I don't get it up late at night. And I sent out like an apology email to paid subscribers last night because, and just giving them a heads up, a lot of people like to wake up with the show, so it always makes me feel guilty if it's not there for you with your morning coffee. But anyway, I sent out this email saying it'll be late, and the great Will Powers made me feel so good when he said, no worries, seriously, the quality of the show you put out every day is better than multiple media networks. And it made me feel fantastic. And I agree. So let me now steal the work of those multiple media networks just here for our news update, because it's the clip show, part of the show, giving you as much context in audio as I can in audio extravaganza. It's time for the last 24. All right, to get us started, I want to read the Today in One Sentence feature of the WTF Happened Today email. I love this email I subscribe to. And the guy, Matt, who writes it, Matt Visor, I think is his name, he always opens with Today in One Sentence, where he says, Ukraine President Zielinski invoked Pearl Harbor in the September 11th attacks as he pleaded with U.S. Congress for more help, telling lawmakers, quote, we need you right now. I call on you to do more. Biden called Putin a war criminal and said he will commit $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine. The International Court of Justice ordered Russia to, quote, immediately suspend its military operations in Ukraine. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 0.25 percentage point. The RNC sued its own email vendor in an effort to stop from complying with a subpoena from the January 6th committee, and 35% of Americans approve of the U.S., quote, taking military action, even if it risks a nuclear conflict with Russia. 35%! I mean, who says that? Who is the guy that looks at that question in a poll? What is the question in the poll, by the way, that it was asked? I don't know. But says, you know what? Shit. I'll tell you what. Yeah, we will kick the shit out of Russia. I don't know who this character is, by the way, but he has to be the type of guy who says, even if we could be in some kind of nuclear war, we have to do it. What? I don't know. I'm actually more offended and astonished by my character than I am by what he said regarding his openness to potential nuclear war. All right, well, let's get to the first clip I've got for you. This is the English part of President Vladimir Zielinski's address to the U.S. Congress yesterday. And I'm going to give you the full 2 minutes, I think. This is the part that he spoke in English. I thought the whole thing was worth it. All the way to the end. Listen to this.
Today it's not enough to be the leader of the nation. Today it takes to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Peace in your country doesn't depend anymore only on you and your people. It depends on those next to you, on those who are strong. Strong doesn't mean weak. Strong is brave and ready to fight for the life of his citizens and citizens of the world, for human rights, for freedom, for the right to live decently and to die when your time comes, and not when it's wanted by someone else, by your neighbor. Today, the Ukrainian people are defending not only Ukraine. We are fighting for the values of Europe and the world, sacrificing our lives in the name of the future. That's why today the American people are helping not just Ukraine, but Europe and the world to keep the planet alive, to keep justice in history. Now I'm almost 45 years old. Today my age stopped when the hearts of more than 100 children stopped beating. I see no sense in life if it cannot stop the death. And this is my main mission as the leader of my people, great Ukrainians. And as the leader of my nation, I am addressing the President Biden. You are the leader of the nation, of your great nation. I wish you to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Oh, man. President Zielinski, I think he knows what he's doing. I think he delivers different addresses to different audiences differently. I do. I think he talked slow and methodically in that one because he thinks American congressmen are stupid. Some of them have been raised on cable news and talk radio. I mean, seriously, a whole bunch of certainly the Republicans. And I think he addresses different audiences differently and drops his voice at certain points. I think that guy is an absolute expert master at performance. And that's important. It's always been important. It's always been important for politicians and for leaders, even for the principal of a school, for anybody, for me, the host of this podcast, trying to think about how I'm going to best communicate and then edit the shit out of my own misspeaking. At least here in the intro, I often do. I try to keep it pretty smooth. But if you catch something, email me, and then I'll go and tell me the exact time code of where I misspoke or my voice left me, etc., whatever it is, and I will then work it into the next day's show if you want. It shouldn't be too much of a burden. Did I just create hours of work for myself because I misspeak so often? Oh, dear. All right, let's get to President Biden's reaction to Zielinski's speech, who, by the way, he in his remarks, he also said, the speech featured this video of harrowing scenes from the war-torn country, graphically depicting the brutal and deadly toll of the Russian invasion, says CNN.com Politics. And at the end, the screen read, the screen, it said on the screen, close the sky over Ukraine. And so it's going to really create a groundswell, I think, of support for a, quote, no-fly zone, which would be American fighter jets potentially in the air fighting against Russian fighter jets. How do you see it? What do you think of it? I talked with Bill Boyle specifically about that today. But President Biden then went out and committed, as I said, $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine. And I've got a few clips on that, the reaction to it. Here first, the president in a very impactful moment and making a huge commitment. It probably won't be enough for a lot, but still, here's about 2 minutes of that yesterday.
Now I'm once again using my presidential authority to activate an additional security assistance to continue to help Ukraine fend off Russia's assault. An additional $800 million in assistance. That brings the total of new U.S. security assistance to Ukraine to $1 billion just this week. These are direct transfers of equipment from our Department of Defense to the Ukrainian military to help them as they fight against this invasion. And I thank the Congress for appropriating these funds. This new package on its own is going to provide unprecedented assistance to Ukraine. It includes 800 anti-aircraft systems to make sure the Ukrainian military can continue to stop the planes and helicopters that have been attacking their people and to defend their Ukrainian airspace. And at the request of President Zielinski, we have identified and are helping Ukraine acquire additional longer-range anti-aircraft systems and the munitions for those systems. Our new assistance package also includes 9,000 anti-armor systems. These are portable, high accuracy shoulder-mounted missiles that the Ukrainian forces have been using with great effect to destroy invading tanks and armored vehicles. It'll include 7,000 small arms, machine guns, shotguns, grenade launchers to equip the Ukrainians, including the brave women and men who are defending their cities as civilians, and they're on the countryside as well. And as well as the ammunition, artillery, and mortar rounds to go with small arms, 20 million rounds in total, 20 million rounds. And this will include drones, which demonstrates our commitment to sending our most cutting-edge systems to Ukraine for its defense.
All right, and now here's just a little bit of what you're going to hear from reporters. This is John Decker in the White House, and you're going to hear this from reporters and pundits, and I think all of these questions are mostly valid, but I still am uncomfortable with some of the way that they're being asked. Talk about that again with Bill Boyle in terms of reporters, journalists, folks with access to the leaders of the federal government, the State Department, the Department of Defense, obviously the president and his spokeswoman asking these types of questions that seem to ramp up a more violent hot war. Again, that's my opinion. But here's John Decker with Jen Psaki yesterday illustrating kind of what I'm talking about. The president commits to almost $1 billion worth of military equipment, and here's how it gets interpreted, which is not necessarily terrible. I'm just saying.
You put out a list of all of the military equipment included in that $800 million that's being provided to Ukraine. Among those items, let me read them to you: 100 grenade launchers, 5,000 rifles, 1,000 pistols, 400 machine guns, and 400 shotguns. Are you saying those items are not offensive weapons?
They're weapons that help the Ukrainian people fight against an invasion by a foreign country.
They can be used offensively, can they not?
Again, they're weapons. What I'm talking about is weapons that can be used to fight.
The answer is yes. I mean, although you don't want to say it, that answer to that question is yes. And so, obviously, you're trying to make this distinction between offensive.
Well, what we're talking about. Let me finish. Well, let me finish my answer.
No, you aren't. No, I was finishing a point, and then you can respond to mine.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, you're making this distinction between offensive and defensive weapons. Anybody that looks at that list of weapons that I just mentioned, they would say clearly they're offensive. If a Ukrainian military officer or someone who is enlisted has one of these weapons, they can take out a Russian military official of some sort with these weapons. They're offensive in nature. So why not provide more offensive weapons like this to the Ukrainian military?
Well, first of all, we are providing a range of rifles, etc. There is a difference between a plane and planes and massive military systems. I think anybody would recognize this. And what we're talking about, which is giving rifles and pistols to many of them farmers and people living in countrysides to defend themselves. I think there's a difference that most people recognize.
Also yesterday, I think this was at the signing of the Violence Against Women's Act, which I've got some audio from, but he was asked by a reporter if he thought, President Biden if he thought that Vladimir Putin was a war criminal. And at first he dismissed it. He's like, no. And then he kept walking. And there's a whole bunch of people, because it was a bill signing. It was an important situation, moment. And so there was all these important women, and he's shaking everybody's hands. And then he turns back to that reporter. I think she was from Fox News. And he says that he changed his mind. He basically is like, I do think he's a war criminal, which was kind of a weird moment, because you knew after he was asked the question the first time, he went back and started saying hi to everybody, but he was only thinking about his answer to that question. And then he decided to change it and go back. Anyway, that was an interesting moment. I'd play it for you, but the audio is terrible. But here is, back in the briefing room, a question about that moment and the importance of what the president said about Putin being a war criminal.
Go ahead. Back on this question of labeling Putin a war criminal. I mean, this war has now been going on for 3 weeks. So far, the president has declined to use this label. As you note, there is an ongoing sort of formal process before you can use this term. So something must have changed for the president to feel like he could take this additional step today. What? What else?
The president was answering a direct question that was asked and responding to what he has seen on television. We have all seen barbaric acts, horrific acts by a foreign dictator in a country that is threatening and taking the lives of civilians, impacting hospitals, women who are pregnant, journalists, others. And I think he was answering a direct question.
Also, it would be like asking somebody who had murdered a bunch of people before and then murdered a new person. And you're like, is he a murderer? Like, yeah, he's always been a murderer. He was a murderer before, and now he's murdering more people, which is actually really not a metaphor. It's exactly what the question was. War criminal, murderer, I think, are pretty synonymous with each other. But Vladimir Putin has been considered a war criminal in the past in other conflicts. Look it up. Tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think he committed war crimes in Chechnya. Pretty sure his guys did, for sure, under his orders. But now the answer is, well, I think what changed his mind, the president's mind, was he's watching TV and he saw a maternity ward had been bombed. And, of course, he had the reporting on that corroborated by his own intelligence agencies. Not that journalists weren't already doing a pretty good job about it. But I'm not sure that anybody other than Putin and his minions are questioning the war crimes that are clearly being committed. You know what? I stopped recording and I went and looked it up. And Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have recorded Russian war crimes in Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine, and, of course, Syria. Also, Doctors Without Borders documented war crimes in Chechnya. In 2017, the Office of United Nations Commission for Human Rights reported Russia using cluster and incendiary weapons in Syria, constituting the war crime of indiscriminate attacks in a civilian-populated area. And that's in like a 30-second search. You can go look up what the European Court of Human Rights issued 115 verdicts against Russia. So there is a long, long litany of war crimes being committed by Russia under Vladimir Putin. All right, now let's get some more reaction to the president's announcement. And you're hearing it, obviously from all kinds of politicians. Here is an actual certified circus clown and senator from South Carolina. It's old Lindsey Graham. And as always, channeling the ghost of what John McCain would have said and thought.
John's no longer with us, but I think he's here in spirit at this moment. If Senator McCain were here, it'd be 27 MiGs they'd want to transfer, because he'd probably be in one headed toward Ukraine. The bottom line is, 20 days into this fight, we're all amazed at how bad the Russians are doing and how well the Ukrainians are doing. And I think what Senator Whitehouse is trying to remind us all of, that the outcome in Ukraine really does matter to the world writ large.
All right, there is Senator Graham channeling Senator McCain and saying crazy shit, and here's more crazy shit being said. That was from the Senate floor. here he was being asked a question about the reporter. Does he stand by supporting the assassination of a foreign leader, in this case, Vladimir Putin? Does he stand by that? Does he want to give Russian state television a clip to play so that if Vladimir Putin does get killed, everybody says, see, here's Senator Lindsey Graham demanding it. I'm sure he ordered it. Oh, and by the way, listen to after the reporter asked the question the first time. He just goes,
Stand by your call to have Putin be assassinated? Do you still stand by your call?
Yeah, I hope he'll be taken out one way or the other. I don't care how they take him out. I don't care if we send him to The Hague and try him. I just want him to go. Yes, I'm on record. Please understand, Senator Lindsey Graham, and if John McCain were here, he'd be saying the same thing, I think. It's time for him to go. He's a war criminal. I wish somebody had taken Hitler out in the 30s. So, yes, that Vladimir Putin is not a legitimate leader. He is a war criminal. He needs to be dealt with by the Russian people.
I don't care how they take him out. They can drop an anvil on his head or slip him a little hemlock in his ham biscuit. That's what I would do. I don't, doesn't matter to me as long as he's gone. He needs to be gone. Gone, boy, gone. All right, I got a little carried away, but yeah, it's just, you can want someone, a foreign leader, dead because they're going to blow up the world, but you also have to be smart about where and how you say it and who you say that to. And I just don't think that's being smart. And I don't know if it's also smart to channel what a dead person would say or think. Now, I talked to John McCain. I went to my medium and I talked to John McCain yesterday. He's in heaven. And he told me, you know what, Lindsey, you tell them to bomb Russia. And I said, I'm going to go tell everybody you said that. Thank you, medium lady. And now back to President Biden.
Now, I want to be honest with you. This could be a long and difficult battle, but the American people will be steadfast in our support of the people of Ukraine in the face of Putin's immoral, unethical attacks on civilian populations. We are united in our abhorrence of Putin's depraved onslaught, and we're going to continue to have their backs as they fight for their freedom, their democracy, their very survival. And we're going to give Ukraine the arms to fight and defend themselves through all the difficult days ahead. We're going to continue to mobilize humanitarian relief to support people within Ukraine and those who have been forced to flee Ukraine.
Okay, Joe Biden yesterday, and let's head over to the State Department where the spokesman for Anthony Blinken, Ned Price, was listing what the price is for Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We have placed unprecedented pressure on the Russian economy, on its financial system, and every day you see very tangible metrics of that. Stock market remains closed, will remain closed for at least the remainder of this week and potentially even longer, presumably in an effort to prevent capital flight. The ruble is virtually worthless. It is literally worth less than a penny. Russia is on the verge of default. Its credit rating is at junk status. Hundreds of international companies are fleeing the Russian market, and we can go on and on. We have placed unprecedented.
Well, there you go. Ned Price yesterday at the State Department with his list. And now I want to bring you over to CNN, where Christian Amanpour yesterday had that Russian state television journalist who took that dramatic stand against Putin's war in Ukraine during a live broadcast. She had her on as a guest, and she said it was impossible to stay silent. She wants the world to know that many Russians are against the invasion. And here is the interview with the English translation, and the Russian journalist's name is, let me try it, Marina Avsyannikova. Marina Avsyannikova. Nailed it.
Marina, can I just ask you, you are an ordinary Russian woman who worked for state television. You have 2 children. What on earth made you do this? How did you decide to do it?
You know, I decided to do it spontaneously. but the decision was brewing for quite a long time. You know, lately I have been feeling a cognitive dissonance more and more between my beliefs and what we say on air. It was a growing sense of dissatisfaction that kept increasing every year. And the war was the point of no return, when it was simply impossible to stay silent. And I realized that I would either need to do something or we will reach a point of no return. And it will be more and more difficult to do anything.
All right. That is one. All right. That is one brave young woman. And I'm kind of confused and surprised as to why they let her out and how long they detain people who hold up signs in the Russian Kremlin Square. Is that what it's called? In Moscow or anywhere else. I mean, how does it work? That'd be an interesting person to interview, to talk to about how did she get out and be able to go talk to CNN? That's just interesting and confusing to me. I'm curious about that. All right, moving on from all things Ukraine, and it's hard to because there's so much more good audio and commentary. And send me what you're seeing. It always helps me get organized and put out the most important things. If you saw or hear something, some audio during the day on any media outlet, try to get it to me by like 6 p.m. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I can try to include it in that day's show. And you're doing me a favor. Now, I saw this. I don't know if I saw this tweeted out by someone, a listener, but it was gone viral yesterday. This is an exchange. It took place in February, but it really caught fire for whatever reason yesterday on social media, on Twitter, especially where I saw it. This incredible exchange between a local reporter and a far-right politician. This is in the state of Idaho, and this is the lieutenant governor there. Her name is McGeechan, and she was speaking at a white nationalist conference last month, and KTTV, Brian Holmes, caught up with her, and I watched this and listened to it twice. It's 4 minutes. If it's boring you, it's kind of cringeworthy and awkward to hear, but it is really good and kind of a clinic as to how any reporter, I think, should handle any politician who speaks at a white nationalist conference or with a white nationalist at any conference. Well done, Brian Holmes.
Are you familiar with who puts this event on? Like Nick Fuentes?
I don't know who he is. I've never met him. I don't know who he is.
Did you not look into it before you decided to say okay? Like to find out, I mean, his name is on it.
Well, you know what? Nick Fuentes, as I said, I don't know him. I've never met him. I don't know, what he's, everything that he says or doesn't say is not, does not reflect on who I am or who the thousands of others that are participating in this movement.
Okay. You didn't bother to look up his name or anything?
I didn't say that.
You did look him up?
You didn't, that's not the question that you asked me.
Did you look up who Nick Fuentes was and what he's talked about? Like things he has said?
I have since. Since
last week, not before?
Yes.
Okay, I guess the question is, because if you've said, well, I'm only
Again,
here
it's not fair. The mainstream media, you do this to conservatives all the time, but you don't do it to yourself. That anytime there's any kind of affiliation with anybody at any time on any stage, that we're all guilty by association, and it's not appropriate.
But the association is not a good one. To be associated with people who are anti-Semitic or... Stop.
Yes. Excuse me.
Yes.
You asked me why I was there, why I wanted to participate and speak to these young conservatives. That's what we're talking about right now.
Okay. Vincent James was also there. Correct? Do you know who Vincent James is?
I've heard of him.
You've had your picture taken with him?
I did have my picture taken with him.
Okay. Do you know what he stands for and things that he has said?
No, I don't know all the things that he or anybody else. And again, I'm just going to keep repeating the same thing, that this guilt by association that the media tries to do with conservatives and conservatives only is that if we ever have met somebody once or took a picture with them or ever shared a stage with somebody ever, we're all guilty by association. If you want to know why I went there and what my message was, go watch my video.
I did watch your video, and if you had known,
that's what it was all about.
If you had known who Nick Fuentes is, would you have said yes?
Well, again, this movement is so much bigger than one individual. Who cares what Nick Fuentes has to say? Who cares? There's thousands and thousands of young conservatives all across the country that are very concerned about what's happening to our country. We are fighting for the soul of our nation. With these wide open borders, it's only a matter of time that America, we lose who we are as a free country. And I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to hide from being willing and wanting to go talk to young conservatives about these issues.
If you say nobody cares what Nick Fuentes says, but people care that you're associated with them or that you share a stage with something.
Again,
like that.
you're trying to do this guilt by association over and over and over again, and it needs to stop. Because if you want to know who I am and why I went there, I've told you that. And don't assassinate me or my character over something that any individual that I may ever have met in my life. If there are things that are said or that they believe in, then that's that person. It's not me.
But that's not the first time. My point of bringing up Vincent James.
There you go.
Right? I mean, that's not the first time you've been associated with this group.
Interview's over.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I know what just happened. I know what I got. I know what I got from you just now and how weird it was and how folks, the public is going to interpret that, I hope. Anyway, I thought that was worth listening to. I hope you did as well. That's all the audio I have for you from yesterday. And now it's time to get to the rest of the headlines, rapid fire style, with an exclamation point, a positive one being put on at the end by my daughter Ava with her good news story. But let's get it started with another great jingle from Pete Coe, who wrote a great jingle about a story from Japan where there is a boom in falconry because crows are attacking solar power plants with stones. And the only effective way to keep crows away from the solar power. Why are crows attacking solar power? How are crows throwing stones? Anyway, they've deployed falcons, and apparently one trained falcon making 60 attack sorties, they're referring to them, a day, can protect 100,000 solar panels from vengeful crows. This is an amazing story, and I wanted to tell it to you before you heard the jingle this time. Take it away, Pete Coe.
Solar panels in Japan, crows are dropping stuff. It's time to unleash the falcons on today's news dump.
I love it. It's so good. Oh, they're so good. I look so forward to them. You know, he texts me, your intro and dump already. And I just love it. I can't tell you how much. At PeteCoVO on Twitter. And Woody, I like that I read the story first. I think that put it in better context and makes the jingle that much better. Okay, what else do I have for you? Well, huge news coming out of the Fed yesterday. The Fed hiked interest rates to fight the record inflation that we're having here in the good old USA today. The Federal Reserve on Wednesday increased its baseline interest rate range, launching the first in what will likely be a series of rate hikes meant to fight inflation. Talked about that a little with Ritholtz yesterday if you didn't hear it, and here is the announcement that we expected, and we'll get reaction. Would love to hear your reaction. What does this mean to you, do you think, as a consumer, as a homeowner, as a lender, as a borrower, whatever, any perspective? Let me know. All right, this next story could have been Ava's good news story because it is a great news story, I think. Cancer deaths continue to drop in U.S. I say I think because, that seems pretty obvious, but why is that? Cancer remains the second leading cause of death in the United States. The American Cancer Society in January projected 360 deaths from cancer, or roughly 1,670 deaths per day will occur in the U.S. in 2022. The death rate due to cancer for men and women combined has decreased 32% from its peaks from 1991 to 2019, and the decline they say, is the result of changes in habits, new approaches to cancer treatments, and early detection. So that is massive good news, right? There you go, folks, huh? Something to feel good about. Texas mail ballot rejections have soared under new restrictions, so they just had a primary vote there March 1st, and roughly 13% of the mail ballots were discarded and unaccounted across 187 counties in Texas. While historical primary comparisons are lacking, the double-digit rejection rate would be far beyond what is typical in a general election, when experts say anything above 2% will usually be cause for attention. This, of course, is as a result of this broad campaign from Republicans to reshape American elections, according to an analysis by the Associated Press. A lot to talk about with that story. Moving on. President Biden yesterday signed the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women's Act. You know, I had some good audio from that, and somehow I didn't get it onto the show. Sorry, but some great comments made yesterday by the president, by the vice president, and more. But yesterday, the president signing the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, reflecting on the decades-long work on the law at an event in the White House. He said, this law broke the dam of congressional resistance and cultural resistance, and it brought this hidden epidemic out of the shadows. This is part of a $1.5 trillion government funding bill, which President Biden signed into law today and really did not get enough attention. That one that included the spending, the aid for Ukraine. The bill increases services for survivors in the LGBTQ community and increases support for culturally specific services and services in rural communities, and does so much more. I should probably interview an expert about that one, too. A new book is out by New York Times journalist Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns, and they say that Senator Lindsey Graham, who we heard from earlier, called the White House on January 6th and said lawmakers would ask cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove then-President Trump from office if he did not do more to condemn the rioters at the Capitol. So is that why he came out and made a video? Because Senator Graham was threatening to, or at least discussing the 25th Amendment? That's an interesting detail I don't think we'd heard reported anywhere else. Hi, it's me, Lindsay, and I am pissed. You tell President we're going to do the 25th Amendment thing on him if he doesn't get out there right now and go on InstaHub and make a video telling those people to climb down off the walls. You tell him that. Where's my tea? Someone get me a cup of tea. Actual audio from the call. How did I get that? An exclusive here at Stand Up. All right, move on to Walmart, shall we? Where they are looking to hire some 50,000 U.S. workers this quarter, the largest employer in the United States, looking to add to their workforce by the end of April. And speaking of Walmart, a terrible headline for them. Their distribution center in Indianapolis is burning to the ground. The Walmart distribution center in Indiana, the smoke's so thick it's been seen on local radar. There were 1,000 people inside, but it was all evacuated. Apparently, they believe all employees are accounted for, and they were all transported by school buses the hell out of there. No injuries at the time that I'm reading this early on Thursday, St. Patrick's Day. I forgot to mention it's St. Patrick's Day and Purim for any religious Jewish people. 31.5 million Americans claim Irish ancestry, second only to German, and 6.5 times Ireland's population, by the way. And I looked up some fun facts for the news dump for St. Patrick's Day. An average of 13 million pints of Guinness are served on St. Patrick's Day. Anyone that's ever visited or lived in Chicago knows they dump 50 pounds of green dye into the river every St. Patrick's Day. Over half of Americans plan to celebrate it this year. 79% of those celebrating plan to wear some green. Wallet Hub says $6.16 billion will be spent on St. Patrick's Day this year. But be careful with your alcohol consumption, folks. 60 people were killed in drunk driving crashes on March 17th in 2016. It's such a problem that Uber stepped up to try to discourage people from getting behind the wheel by providing promo codes, apparently. And besides drinking, Irish food also playing a part. Cabbage shipments increased 70% in the week leading up to the big day. 30% of Americans celebrate by preparing a traditional Irish meal. Val was threatening to make a shepherd's pie, but then decided against it. Americans have been celebrating St. Patrick's Day for 281 years. And those are your St. Patrick's Day fun facts. I didn't even remember it was St. Patrick's Day until just then. How about that for being nimble? All right, now let's check in over with our good news correspondent. It's time to go to the good news desk with America's favorite 17-year-old, my daughter, Ava. Ava, what have you have for us? What do you have for us today?
I have a good one. I know you don't think that teams should be named after Native American tribes.
Right. You think right. That's right. I don't think that's good. They don't think it's good, more importantly.
Yeah, so I do. I have a story for you.
All right. What is it?
All right. So a Connecticut school board voted unanimously on Tuesday to remove the Indians moniker as the school's athletic team's mascot.
All right.
The neighboring Mohegan tribe has reportedly offered financial assistance to the school as they move away from the name. A state law passed last summer will eventually disqualify schools across the state whose mascots include tribal names without consent from receiving funds from the Mohegan Fund.
All right. Well, that's a pretty good one. Do you have any good news in your life? Anything good that you want to share? What are you grateful for? What did you accomplish today?
I finally got the car as my own.
Did?
Yeah, I named her Meg.
You named the car Meg? Why?
Yes, I originally named it Barbara, but that's my boyfriend's mom's name, and it was weird. So now it's Meg.
All right. A Honda CRV named Meg. Thanks, Ava.
Of course.
All right, there she goes. Sorry, I'm using a mic that's got like a loose wire or something. Sorry about that. But that was great. I don't know what she was talking about. I finally got the car on my own. I mean, it's still our car, but it's hers. We let her now use that, but I did put her on the spot. That's what she came up with, and I thought it was it's really funny. She's awesome. Okay, well, there you go. I can't do this show without your support. So today's news dump is brought to you by you. StandUpWithPete.com to sign up now for as little as $5 a month. Come on, if you haven't yet. I could use some new subscribers. That always makes my day to see those new subscriptions come in. Equally, when people edit their subscription up, which several of you did this week, you can always pay $10 or $15, whatever it's worth to you. If you listen every day, then, well, you decide. I'm happy to have you supporting. I hope to see you tonight at our hangout. But right now, it's time to get to my first guest coming up. I think an awesome conversation. I called up Bill Boyle to talk about Ukraine. He makes many good points, as always. But first, probably one of the, if not the most popular guest on the podcast, according to the numbers whenever he's on. It is Dr. Aaron Carroll, everybody, and he is an expert, a research expert, a pediatrician. He's now the chief health officer at Indiana University, the University of Indiana. He also hosts Healthcare Triage on YouTube, which is also a podcast, and they have a new series in partnership with the National Institute of Health. This is a huge deal, and we talk about it right here at the top and explain what it is. But please go listen and subscribe to this 8-part series. I'll link to it in the show notes. Follow Aaron on Twitter at Aaron E. Carroll. Always let him know that you heard him here. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Aaron Carroll with an amazing jingle from the great Gareth Sever of bucketsandboards.com, the comedy percussion show. Gareth, take it away.
Paging Dr. Carroll. Paging Dr. Carroll.
Aaron Carroll. He's Karen, and he shares it all. Aaron Carroll. He's blaring it out and bears it all.
He knows modern medicine, dispels disinformation. He's a brilliant pediatrician. All that and then some. Aaron Carroll. He's the IUCHO, does HSR, writes NYTO, and puts out HC
Paging Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll to the Shedio.
Dr. Carroll to the Shedio is my personal favorite part. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, and we're always happy when we get to talk to him. People are always talking about him to me, and I have something to reveal to you. One of the most listened to episodes of all time was the last time you were on, which is evidence to at least this audience how much they love to hear from you. Thank you.
Oh, that's very nice. What did we talk about the last time I was on?
We were talking about me going through puberty late and what that did to my psychology as a small man.
I don't think we did, but
we
okay,
didn't.
So.
That was off the air. Anyway, I don't remember, but probably COVID.
Well, that's nice. I'm glad people enjoy it.
So I'm very happy to have you here because there's so much to discuss with you. And I also pitched this idea to you the other day when I was talking to you from the grocery store for an hour. I said, we got to have a everything but medicine conversation. So there's a bunch of questions I want to ask to get your take on. But I got to say here at the top, congratulations to you is in order because of this new podcast special series, part of the Healthcare Triage umbrella of amazing scientific research content hosted by you. It's called Science, Culture, and the Reproducibility Crisis, which didn't know what that meant until I listened to it. But you have been working on this for 2 years, even since before the pandemic. It's a big deal. Yeah. There are 6 episodes. It's going to win. No, there are 8 episodes. It's going to win awards, in my opinion, but we got to figure out how to give it all the attention it deserves. Congratulations. What is this?
So, like, we got a grant from the NIH to make this podcast because they had the second RFA. We actually got funded in the first RFA, but we made videos that time to talk about what's wrong with reproducibility crisis, how so much research turns out not to be right. And they wanted someone to address the culture of science. And we were really interested, and we wrote a grant and got it funded to make this podcast. But we were, gearing up to get going in like late summer to fall of 2019. And we just started. And of course, the pandemic hit. And we had all of these plans to travel the country and actually even go to Europe to record the podcast with all of these guests. And we had a timeline, get it done in a year. But that all ended. And we had to quickly change gears. And we developed these kits, which we sent around the country, or the world, actually, or not most of the country, to experts to record them. And of course, I had to develop all this stuff at home so we could record here. And we did the interviews over the course of the next year or so during the pandemic, and then enormous amount of work that Tiffany Doherty did, who works in the show. Going through all of the transcripts and putting it all together. And then Stan and Mark. It's amazing. I listened to it and I'm like, I can't believe it's so good. It's so well done.
It is as good as anything that the New York Times or NPR or any documentary type produced audio content exists. It's as good as that. And I will, I'm going to play the introduction to it before or some point here. I don't know where I'll put it on because it really does. The way it starts is great because you ask a bunch of experts what they think, if they think there is a reproducibility crisis. But again, let's take a step back, Mr. Academia. What you're saying, basically, what a lot of researchers, scientists, experts are saying is that there's way too many flaws in studies coming out of reputable organizations, schools, universities, companies, and that there's so much flawed research. And you're trying to get to the bottom of how bad it is, why it is, and how to fix it. How did I do?
That's pretty good. So there were 4 domains that the NIH wanted to tackle. And with our videos, we tackled 2 of them previously. It was research methods and analysis and reporting, talking about how research methods can be flawed and how they can be better. And then how we analyze and report it. But this podcast tackles what's wrong with the culture of science. What's wrong with just the whole culture, the way we train people, the way we fund people, the way the universities and academia are set up, the ways that we report things out, publication, everything. What about the culture of science is wrong?
How much of it is wokeness?
Bad research. Was that?
How much of it is the wokeness?
No, I don't even think that's one of the few things I think no one brought up that we talked to a bunch of experts. Yeah, nobody.
Well, the whole series, it's 8 episodes and it goes deep. And now, do you think that your average interested, curious person, someone like me and listeners of this podcast or name any other type of content, will they be able to listen to this and be interested in it? Who did you make it for? Did you make it for, or did you make it for academia, scientists, people who are interested in and do research themselves?
Technically, it's pitched at learners, like people who are learning about science. In fact, we designed it so that you could use in courses that, it actually comes with, if you go to the website, lesson guides and, ways to adapt it to actual, courses that you might be giving, in which case people are learning about science. But, because it was adapted to be somewhat educational, I think it really is anyone. It's the only thing I've made that I've actually watched and listened to again. Almost 8 hours of it start to finish. Because
you're on the Colbert Report, right?
Well, but that's a 5-minute clip. This is like, I don't listen to every episode of our podcast over again, but I listened to this entire thing, like start to finish, multiple times, because it's just so well done, on top of being, to me, utterly fascinating.
The thing, the concern I had when I started learning about what you did here with this is, oh, great. There's a problem with science and people already don't trust experts enough. And this series is only going to make more serious, thoughtful people be even more skeptical about it. And I worry about all those types of outcomes. What do you think of my concern?
Yeah, but I think we talk about what's wrong, but we also talk about how to fix it. We spend the last 2 episodes on solutions. What we could do. This is not like an impossible problem, but and I think it's also that people need to understand that, we keep trying to blame this on politics or on, tribal, whatever you want to call it. But some of it is just inherent to the infrastructure and the way we structure how we do science. And that's got to be fixed. That has nothing. Well, I'm sure someone can taint it and talk about how it's related to politics or anything else that's going on. But there are problems that are just inherent to the culture of science that we need to acknowledge and we need to address.
How about this as an idea for my audience to promote it? Send an email to your doctor friends, scientist friends, or students and say, hey, this is a cool series you might be interested in. Is that a weird kind of question?
I think of but it's like, I really do think that this is of general interest too. If you want to understand how science actually gets done, not just in the United States.
I love the role of the media for me. Like, I like that episode. It is so important.
Yeah. I think it explains a bunch of things that I think, unless you're steeped in academia or science, that you just don't get. I think people have a misunderstanding about how this all works and how it is all put together and how much of it has changed in the last few decades.
So let's talk about COVID a bit. I've been asking you a lot of these kind of questions off the air, and we were talking and naming names about people that you trust more or less, so you think have more or less credibility on these things. It's become obviously certainly controversial even amongst scientists in terms of where you're on the spectrum of concern. But how would you put kind of where we're at? It would seem that the risk is much lower now for folks who are vaccinated and live in vaccinated areas. And even if they aren't, because now there are new treatments if you do contract COVID. But and then obviously there's new research all the time. And specifically, we're seeing kids in schools not wearing masks now. And what does that mean? What's the best, you think, and most important question about where we're at right now in the pandemic in the U.S.?
Well, I think we should acknowledge we're in a good place right this second. God knows when this will, I guess this airs soon, but like right this second, things are pretty good in the United States. Case counts are really low. Hospitals have been emptying out. We are down really on the downward swing of this, Omicron surge. And, that's good. We should acknowledge that. It's good. It's relatively safe out there right now, especially if you're vaccinated and boosted. Just so much better. According to some estimates, like 45% or more of people got Omicron in the United States. That means that they have pretty damn good immunity against Omicron. And add to that people who are vaccinated and boosted, and that's a pretty good level of immunity. And so things are good. The problem is no one knows how long it'll last and what might happen with another surge. Looking at what's going on in UK and parts of Europe right now, they're seeing a significant bump in cases. We don't know if those will be mostly mild because this looks like it's, a subset of Omicron, like SA2 or whatever they're calling it. it therefore may be cases, but not hospitalizations and deaths. And if that's the case, that's a much better outcome. I mean, we would be less concerned if we saw case infections, but not really bad outcomes. But we don't know yet. So everyone's sort of holding their breath to see what happened. And then, of course, the inevitable question is, can that happen in the United States? Some wastewater monitoring systems are picking up increases in cases. We don't know yet if that'll translate into actually increased infectious cases. And we don't know if perhaps we're different than Europe because we had such a bad time with Omicron that maybe we have more immunity than some of those other countries. So there's just a lot of variables up in the air for the future that we just don't know whether to say, like, that's it, we're done. But right this second, it is good. And so I'm trying to enjoy that.
One of the issues, however, is that to stay good, you have to stay on top of it. You have to keep the funding up for testing and obviously vaccinations and access. And I can't find this tweet of this news item where apparently
it was the White House talking about the Congress didn't fund it, so they got to start shutting everything down. It's just mind-boggling.
Congress didn't fund funding. They didn't pass continued funding. And what does that mean? Because you were like, when you
all the stuff we're doing costs money. Sending tests out to people.
Here it is.
Paying for all the antibody treatments, paying for all the therapies, buying them for distribution, buying masks and for distribution. Keeping testing sites and public health all of that costs money, and even like funding additional vaccines costs tens and tens of billions of dollars. And they asked for, I don't know, let's make up a number, $70-80 billion. And Congress so far has given them two.
The White House,
peanuts.
The White House, March 15th from NPR. The White House is warning it will have to wind down a program that pays to test, treat, and vaccinate uninsured people for COVID-19 because the administration has run out of money for the program, which Congress failed to include in funding legislation. You tweeted, I literally cannot believe this. Why is it uninsured people? What does that mean? I mean, if we take the morality out of it, what does that mean policy wise if uninsured people can't get tested and vaccinated?
They can. It's just no longer free.
If they have to pay for it, forgive me.
Whenever you get medical care or anything else, either insurance pays for it or you pay for it out of pocket. And so in order to make it so that no one had to worry about this, the government was just picking up the tab. It's expected that people with insurance will still find ways for insurance to cover a lot of stuff, but uninsured people won't. But honestly, that is just one small part of it. There's just a massive amount of infrastructure that has been passed as part of COVID, getting more people on Medicaid, supporting people in a variety of different ways, lots of grants to keep public health infrastructure up, testing, treatments. All of this is the government was doing it because they needed it to happen during COVID. If we don't keep funding it, it just stops. And believing this is totally over is a great wish, but we don't know. And, to try to stop it and then get hit again and then try to ramp it back up is incredibly short-sighted.
Right. Incredibly short-sighted. And at Indiana University, where you're in charge there as chief medical officer and other organizations across the country, you're not being short-sighted, I'm guessing.
No. Like we have ramped down some of our. In fact, we basically have gone to masks optional, and it's funny because I think some people will view that as like, oh, you're giving up, and I'm like that. Okay, look, we still have vaccine mandate. We still have on Bloomington's campus, 95% of people are vaccinated. We are incentivizing students to get boosted. We actually give them $20. Like Crimson Cash, if they will go get boosted. We're still doing massive levels of testing, ubiquitous, unlimited almost testing for anyone that wants it, certainly symptomatic for all of our 115,000 plus constituents. And that is all, no charge or anything for that. We're still doing contact tracing. We still employ a massive team who do all, the contact tracing, figure out cases, work it back, then implement quarantine and isolation. We still are running quarantine and isolation space for, students that live on campus. We're still giving out high quality KN95 or N95 masks to anybody that wants them, and certainly encouraging. We're doing all of that. All we've removed is mandatory masking for people who are asymptomatic, because again, with these low rates of COVID that we're seeing and this level of immunity, it's just, we're not seeing almost any classroom transmission at all. So the idea, but we're still watching everything and keeping everything else in place at the moment because we don't know this is over and we still have, 2 months left of the semester. And so we're not done and given up. We're just slowly ratcheting things down during a time of safety, knowing that we can do what we need to do if it ratchets back up. But I'm watching the government and the state just done, just wipe it all away,
right?
All of it. And that may go okay, but it might not.
I wanted to ask you about this panel that you participated in for the Center for Health Journalism, #unequal access, covering coronavirus, unequal access to COVID treatments. People of color less likely to receive the newly developed COVID therapeutics, despite the fact that they disproportionately have had a much harder toll from COVID on them. And you were on this panel with a couple of other experts about the unequal distribution of treatments. You know how that played out in Republican politics, including in my state against my governor. It was they, and even Trump said this, they are putting black people ahead of white people to get proper health care.
Well, it's not necessary. First of all, I should be clear, we're taping this before I actually do the panel. So I don't know what people are going to say on the panel.
Oh, I thought this was already done. I'm sorry.
No, well, by the time this airs, it will have already been done. But it's actually, I think it's at 1 or 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
But I expect, look, there's no question that disparities exist in all forms of healthcare in the United States. And COVID didn't cause these, but COVID exacerbates and exposes them. As we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody sort of went shelter in place, except we said, okay, but except for essential workers, keep going to your jobs. Well, essential workers tended to be poorer and often from underrepresented minorities or ethnic groups, and they were therefore at more risk. They also, in general, sometimes lived in housing situations where you couldn't necessarily quarantine and isolate quite easily. In our house, if all 5 of us got it, we could each be in our own room, plenty of distance from each other, but that's not possible in small apartments. It was harder for people to take off from work. They lived, were in jobs where they either didn't have the same kind of support systems or where they were still forced to come in, even if it was unsafe. If your child was in a school lunch program and your school shut down, all of a sudden you had massive levels of food insecurity, not to mention that food insecurity was a problem to begin with. And so everything was worse for some groups. Then, of course, we were trying to come up with what do we do if we have these life-saving antibodies? Do we need to decide who gets them? And some people were proposing, maybe people who have more risk factors or who are less healthy should be put at the back of the line. Again, that's people who are usually in underrepresented minorities or who are poor. So we're putting you at more risk and then saying you're less likely to get treatment. It's a recipe for disaster. So other people are let's do it the opposite. People who are at risk should be first in line.
Right.
But then you get people who go, well, now we're giving, African Americans special treatment. Well, they're not getting special treatment. They're getting, people are getting correct or just or equitable treatment. You can pick your word, but if we're going to place people at higher risk and we're going to stack the deck against them, we have to try sometimes to fix those inequities. That's, unfortunately, some people demonize that, but that's fixing an inequity. It's not creating one.
I also feel like, just the disproportionate effect, it's just that socioeconomics has not only on people of color, but let's say poor white people. It's like you're already poor. You're already living maybe in a tough situation. If you get sick, at least we can give you this treatment. It's just it's a weird thing in bioethics or just in society and the people's values. They're already struggling and they're going to get COVID. Can we not treat them and help them out a little bit based on the situation that potentially you could argue our system put them in to begin with?
The bad part is that I think, most of these things are lip service. They're not even going to make anything better. I wrote a column in the Times, might have been my last one, on it's great that they have these new therapies like Paxlovid for people who get COVID, but the hoops you got to jump through to get it. First of all, you got to have access to testing if you get sick. That's not as easy to do as it used to be. Then you got to get the results back pretty quick. Then, of course, you need to get a prescription for the drug. Well, you need a doctor's prescription for that. Often the doctor will make you see them first before they'll write the prescription. So you better have a primary care doc, and you better have one that'll let you in really soon. And even if you get the prescription, now you got to see where's the pharmacy that might have this. There might not be one close by. So you better have great transportation and time in the day to just wander around to look for the drug. We're stacking the deck once again, where people with the most means and the most plugged in are the ones who are going to get the therapy, which creates more disparities.
All right. Well, there's a lot more questions about COVID, but we don't have all day. You've got that conference to get to. And I did want to ask you some non-healthcare, non-medical related questions, because you and I always have great conversations, certainly not always on the record. And you're always, one of the smartest and most practical and pragmatic people in the world. I think part of that is your ability to take in and synthesize and interpret information, just the way your brain is, your life experience. I'm just wondering, as you watch what is happening with Putin's invasion in Ukraine, I mean, how much are you thinking about that, and what do you think the worst case scenario is? Does Aaron Carroll think that Vladimir Putin might use a nuke?
Well, first of all, we should recognize that when you wander outside of my domains of expertise, you're getting opinion. So
thank you for the disclaimer. What you're about to hear is coming from a guy who
just opinion. Yeah,
just has an
opinion.
But
I mean, of course, the fact that using a nuclear weapon has a greater than zero chance is bad. And I think there's a greater than zero chance. I also think, however, it's pretty low. And it's not because I think I just want to hope that, but, if using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine is just really close to Russia. I mean, you only need to look at how far they had to travel to get to Ukraine. I mean, it's right there. So, any kind of fallback or nuclear fallouts or anything else could easily come right back into Russia. So it's not as if, this is a thing. Plus, you would earn the wrath of the world. I mean, everybody would panic. And I also think at some level, Putin or those in government have to realize, too, that, they're relying on the few allies or at least neutral countries left, the largest of which, of course, is China. And I have to believe China, which is staying neutral at the moment, if not providing tacit support, doesn't want a nuclear weapon, exploded on the near Asian continent. That's horrifically bad. They do not want any kind of nuclear fallout or anything else happening. So I have to believe if it even thought or looked like, Russia was going to wheel out a nuclear weapon, they would very rapidly lose Chinese support as well. And to be completely isolated from the world is, maybe Putin or a couple people don't care, but I think there's probably a fair number of people in Russia who do care. And so I don't know. I don't think it's, and also I will also say that the rest of the world is doing a pretty good job of not rising to the bait. Every time, Putin says something about nuclear weapons or someone else, we're not seeing the usual ratcheting up. It's like, we're not going to respond to that. We're going to just, let that be because, we don't want to get into any kind of escalation where this could go worse than it is now. So, the fact that the one thing that I do worry about all the time is I don't know what Putin's exit ramp looks like.
Right.
They've gotten themselves into a bit of a bind. And I don't know what, they'll need to give to Russia and Putin for them to want, to back down. It's a tough bind for them to save face and get out of this. And they clearly care about that. So making sure that there's a de-escalation pathway, I'm sure lots of people are working on that. And I don't know what that is.
Is there any particular journalist or media outlet that you think is doing a good job or that you rely on for reporting out of this conflict?
I tend to read just a fairly large amount of stuff. To be honest with you, it's somebody I think you've had on your show, Julia Yaffe.
Yeah. Julia's great.
She this has always been her beat, but she seems to have a fairly large number of sources. And there are other people I think I follow on Twitter who seem more plugged in, but this is where it's like I try not to follow politicians are just general journalists because there's always another angle in the same way there is for anything else. And so, people with real expertise in the region or understanding, I feel like tend to do a bit of a better job, but I'd have to go look at my list. I don't know off the top of my head.
Do you celebrate Purim, and do you think there's any case to be made that it's better than Halloween?
I don't actively celebrate Purim, and it is not better than Halloween. It's one of those things, like, as a kid, I don't know, maybe it was the same guy. We didn't really dress up. Like, we went to the Purim carnival, but it was, it was pretty cramped. And it's, plus I'm trying to lose some weight, so eating lots of Hamantash is not in the cards at the moment. But it's not a terribly religious holiday. It's more of, I think, a cultural moment. But do
you celebrate?
No, it's not one of those. I really
it's
do.
Not only is it Purim, but Purim and St. Patrick's Day falling on the same day. Do you celebrate St. Patrick's Day?
I do not. In the same way I'd say about Purim, if somebody asked me to have a drink, I probably would, but I can't say that I celebrate it in any kind of meaningful way.
You being the chef that you are, I would think you might take the opportunity to make a shepherd's pie or a corned beef hash or something.
Again, it's like I'm really stuck in a place where it's like it's getting harder. I must be getting older to lose weight, and I've been trying really hard to just get back a little bit to where I was a couple months ago. No, I also know we're taking a vacation, spring break, first week of April, and I'm trying as hard as I can to not eat badly until then. And unfortunately, the way that I cook, it's not terribly healthy.
Right.
I really go for whatever I think is going to turn out the best result, and not as much for health. Amy, my wife, is much, much more skilled at the healthy cooking.
Well, you know what? Let me go back to your expertise, because I really did want to ask this question. I saw you tweeting about it, and you've been talking and writing about it for years. Daylight saving time. I read an article.
It's ironic. I haven't been writing about daylight savings time as much, but I have been writing about school start times, and that,
that's what I meant.
People have also been talking about.
Well, they're related. You've been writing about schools.
Well, it's funny, yeah. So the major reason sometimes that people won't, change daylight savings time is because they get really upset that kids will have to go to school in the dark. And I'm like, well, don't do that, because they shouldn't be going to school so early anyway. We make them go to school that early because it somehow fits what we're doing in general. And then we just have to jury rig the rest of the world to fit that. I'm very much opposed to early school start times, especially for high school.
I hear that's the sports parents, the sports lobby, because they want their after school sports practice and games to have some daylight to them. Is there any truth to that?
There is, but then they've done like cost effective analysis where they look at like how much would it cost to like put lights up and do all that kind of stuff. And it almost always turns out ahead that it's still better to start school later. But again, screwing legions of adolescents because you want to play sports in the daylight is a bad idea. Like, we can fix that. We have the technology.
Jocks create enough resentment for themselves and their families, and then they got to ruin our mornings as well. Come on.
I've written a couple, it almost feels like yearly articles on like why later school start. And to be honest with you, this is one of the things where I feel like I've won a little bit. I don't know if it's me. I doubt it's me, but
yes,
but a lot of schools have changed their start times. My kids' school has changed their start time. I'm thrilled.
You're taking a victory lap.
Well, I am a little bit. Like, this is one of those where I've been arguing about this for years, and like seeing it actually happen is somewhat satisfying. Even if I'm not the reason, it's nice.
This article I read in the New York Times the other day was just like taking a look at, speaking of where we started, the research on daylight and time and how much it actually affects public health. And basically the conclusion, at least my interpretation is that it's not conclusive, the research. It's very easy for people to make this point. It's an interesting point that somehow people get, more depressed. There's more issues with actual, behavioral, people are dying as a result for some reason. Was it accidents?
Well, I mean, like, if you look at the daylight savings time stuff, yeah, they have like population level stuff that shows that like some stuff really does go bad. But for school start times and the amount of sleep people get and like how much they get, it's like there are good studies, even like close to randomized controlled trials showing that like if we delay school start times, kids actually do sleep longer and they have some downstream better outcomes. So it's like, this is not I don't think anyone disputes the science. I think when it comes to later school start times, what they dispute is whether it will cost us money and be difficult to do and whether that's worth it. And those arguments exist, and like I will have those, but I don't think I've not been really countered with, oh no, the science in support of a later start time is insane. I mean, you need no better example. Like, who goes to their job at 7? Almost no one goes to their job at 7 a.m. The idea that we're sending adolescents off to do that is like only to make our lives easier.
All right. Well, I guess I got to let you go, but I really appreciate all of your time today. Anything else? Anything else that you wanted to say about anything in the world? You're playing Wordle? I
really do hope people go listen to that podcast. I don't pump my stuff too much, but this one, we're so proud of it, and it's so good. I really hope people will go.
So check that out. I'll, of course, link to it in today's show notes, but if you want to look it up, Healthcare Triage, special series, Science, Culture, and the Reproducibility Crisis. Now, who are you on the take for? Because you got this funding, so you guys are biased somehow against...
I don't know, the NIH, but the NIH is like, the fixing funding is part of this, and somebody from the NIH actually appeared on it. But I don't think there's an angle here, because everyone's to blame. Like, all aspects of the culture of science are to blame. It's not like one demon. So this is we need a shared all hands on deck effort to fix this.
Did you see the new Batman?
I did.
Do you want to give a review without spoilers? Short.
I liked it, but I can't say I loved it. I thought it was pretty well done. I liked the fact that it engaged more as Batman, as like a guy that puts on a suit and beats people, like a human being doing stuff. Like, it was more about Batman detective and Batman human than like Batman is going to join other superpowered beings and fix the universe kind of thing. And that felt like it was getting a little bit more to Batman's roots, which I enjoyed.
Yeah.
It was, therefore more realistic, I guess, but it was long. And I actually thought that the final act was really long.
It seems like 3 hours in a movie theater. I did it for Infinity War, and I don't regret it at all. But I can't think of too many movies I'd want to sit in a theater. And this one seems dark and kind of like, I don't know. I'm a huge Batman fan.
The last act felt like it was dragging, and it lasted a long time. And I just, you felt like there was some editing they could have done to tighten this one up. I agree with you. Like, some movies are that long, and I'm like edge of my seat the whole way, and I'm excited that it's that long. This one, I actually was like, I thought it was over before, and now it's not over. Yeah, it was long.
Did you leave to pee?
I did not.
Oh, impressive. Very impressive. All right, Aaron, thank you very much.
Anytime.
And there he goes, Dr. Aaron Carroll. Everybody, please go check out that new podcast series. It's linked to in the show notes, or you can just go to healthcaretriage.info, subscribe to his YouTube channel, follow him on Twitter, let him know that you heard him here on the show. And now it's time to get to my second guest today. I love talking to him. We talk all the time. We text all the time. We're in constant communication. He lives in D.C., where he is a businessman, and we don't think he's a CIA agent or an academic, but he certainly does sound like one. He's a very well-sourced, connected guy, very curious and trusted friend who is constantly taking in information and synthesizing it and putting it through his historical prism. And speaking of history, talking to Kenneth C. Davis on tomorrow's show. But here now, it's, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Boyle on Twitter at Bill B in DC, who's a great follow. And by the way, listener Gareth Sever also wrote a great jingle for Bill B in DC too. Here's that. Let's go.
Bill B in DC. Bill B in DC. He's a DC insider's insider. He runs parking garages and you can park inside there. He's got an opinion on everything. Well, that's kind of his thing, but he backs it up with a mountain of knowledge. I would bet he even went to college. He does the research nobody else wants to do, and he presents it all to me and you. Bill B in DC.
All right, I've got Bill now, and there's a lot to talk about. Always love to get your perspective, and I've got a billion questions for you, but let me just start by one observation I feel like people are not talking about enough. Who would have thought that President Zielinski would have been such a master communicator, built so much support for himself, and used, by the way, media the way that he is using media, graphics, even the camera stuff. There's some really subtle stuff that anybody in media realizes that he's doing. Did anybody realize how effective he was going to be, much less Vladimir Putin? And do you agree with my analysis that that matters?
Oh, I think it's crucially important. I think it is something we probably should have figured out before this all happened, but we didn't. And I'll give you a good example. Winston Churchill, when he was like 23, 24 years old, wrote like 2 or 3 amazing books. So you'd think that before he got into the premiership at the beginning of World War II, people would have figured this guy might write some of the best speeches that are ever written, right? Because he already had written really quite excellent books. Zielinski is a good actor. He is a guy who has, shown some steel in his politics before. He wasn't really popular before Putin invaded. But, he had shown good communication skills. And I will tell you something. I have heard from people who work the Russia side of things in international relations that Putin's always had an eye on Zielinski. He's always worried about him. Because Zielinski is a really popular comedian in Russian and in Russia, both as an actor and a comedian. He's super funny in Russian, and he's very sharp, and he's very piercing in his sense of humor. So I think, for me and you say, we obviously don't speak Russian, and we aren't, listening to Russian media. For us, we wouldn't have known. But I do think that people should have kind of expected this, because he definitely is doing what a really good comedian can and should and would do if they're a brave and honorable person. And obviously, he certainly isn't lacking on bravery and honor at this point.
How much of a factor has it been, the way that he's handled it, addressing Canadian Parliament, UK Parliament, United States Congress, getting standing ovations everywhere, making these videos directly appealing to Russian soldiers and their mothers? I mean, Putin never could have expected this kind of propaganda from the Ukrainian president, and it would be so effective. And he's the master propagandist. He's had these troll farms. He's done so well with his propaganda, state media. I don't know. I guess I'm asking the same question again.
Well, not really, because what you're saying is how important is his information war, effectively, versus the Russian information war. And I would say it's hugely important. I would say it doesn't begin with Zielinski. It begins with the U.S. government under Biden really going at Russia and publicizing everything Putin was doing in the buildup to this war. And that set the stage for Zielinski to take advantage of what everyone knew about Russia. He didn't have to convince people that Russia was launching an aggressive war against his country. He didn't have to convince people that Russia didn't have some legitimate right to do this. He didn't have to convince people that it wasn't so obviously effectively Russian colonialism, right? The U.S. government did that for him, made it very clear. And then then Zielinski took the ball and just ran with it and did a really amazing job. And it is easy to do a disinformation or an information war, not disinformation. It's easy to do an information war if your cause is profoundly just.
That's a good point.
Zielinski's pause is so obviously profoundly just.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. When you're the protagonist of a narrative, it's a different challenge than when you're the villain.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a great example is that before World War II, everybody used to go crazy about how effective German propaganda was. And it was super, super effective up until 1939. And after that, they got creamed by the obviousness of the evilness of their cause. And that's exactly what's happening here.
How about this one? Everybody's saying this, and I just want to get your latest take. Most analysts did not predict Ukraine would be so strong and resilient, effective, and organized. And most analysts did not predict that the Russians would be so inept, unqualified, and unorganized. A, is that narrative, do you think, accurate? Is that binary too simple? And B, where are we now if you believe that it's a pretty well-found narrative?
I mean, I'm one of those people who believe the Ukrainians were not as good as they turned out to be. I'm also one of those people who believe the Russians were better than they turned out to be. As one analyst put it, everyone thought the Russians were 12 feet tall before this. Now everyone's making the mistake that the Russians are only 4 feet tall. And I would say that the key thing that happened here, two key things. Number one, the Ukrainians had clearly been far more well-trained by the United States, Britain, France, whoever, over the last 5 years than anyone realized. What they're winning on is not on firepower and not on numbers. They're winning on really extraordinary training and esprit de corps. They want to fight. They know how to fight. And more particularly, they know how to fight where the Russians are weak and refuse to fight the Russians where the Russians are strong. And so the Russians have all this incredibly heavy firepower and tanks and artillery and rockets, missiles, whatever. It's not doing them any good. Part of that is because Russia invaded with the idea they were basically going to launch a 3-day raid. It was going to be a special operation, sort of what the Russians did when they overthrew the Afghan government right at the beginning of their Afghan war, sort of what they had done against Georgia, what they had done in Armenia, where all these places, they're into special operations. And that's really great. And the Russians are really good at it if you're fighting a small war. Instead, what happened is that because the Ukrainians have their shit together and they really wanted to defend themselves, the Russians basically came in expecting a 3-day party, and it turned into what is now a 3-week nightmare. I think that it was easy for everyone to miss that. I think it was understandable that people missed that, given what had happened in 2014. But basically everybody did. I mean, as you know, I predicted the Russians were going to invade. I did not, in my wildest dreams, expect this to happen the way it went. I'm ecstatic, by the way, that it happened.
So being said, what has surprised you the most? And then, maybe leading into, because you take in so much of the punditry and analysis from the most academic, foreign policy journals to the cable hits to your friends in around D.C. and obviously your historical perspective on it. What is the most profoundly kind of wrong? Before we talk anything no-fly zone, coming up, folks, a great conversation about no-fly zones. Before we get to that, Bill, what analysis have you found really inaccurate, and not even necessarily saying that the source of it is an idiot, but has gotten it wrong? For example, I'm hearing some confusing analysis about whether or not Kyiv is actually encircled, or how hard it would be to shut down the country, or things like that, where people might know a lot about the military, but maybe they don't know as much about that country, that region, its history, culture, etc. I don't know.
Okay, no, that's good. So what's going on right now is that there's a thing called the Rasputitsa, which is the wet season, right? And honestly, it hasn't been rained that much. The Russians have been lucky. But the ground, it's spring, the ground is thawing out, and it's often quite muddy. So what happened in this war, which no one expected, everyone thought the Russians were going to be more capable at moving in the mud. That means that they're stuck on the roads. They were not as capable, so they're stuck on the roads. Narrow frontages, right? The other thing that happened is that the Ukrainians have tons and tons and tons of anti-tank weapons. Shoulder-mounted, single guy walking around with one. They also have tons and tons and tons of man-pads, which are shoulder-mounted, single guy holding a missile over his shoulder that can shoot down pretty much any plane that gets a little bit unlucky that's flying under about 8,000 feet.
Right.
So what everyone had assumed was all this Russian armor and all this Russian air power would be decisive, which it typically has been. Instead, what happened is a bunch of Ukrainian reservists started not just shooting up the tanks, but shooting up the supply lines. So the Russians invaded. They got about 90 miles in, and 90 miles is about the limit of their logistical reach for one truckload to get back and forth in a day, right? That's a bit of a stretch itself. Well, if you look at the map of the Ukraine, the Russians have advanced to about that 90 miles everywhere, if that. And so what's happening is that the Russians are already at the end of their logistical trail, and the thing that nobody expected, I certainly didn't imagine, is that the Ukrainians are really effectively blowing up basically all of their supply trains coming in. So the Russians have this big-ass army, which now becomes a problem. They'd be better off with a smaller army because they have so many men to feed and so many men shooting off ammunition, they can't get them supplied. And now all these guys out in the field, they become a burden to you, right? Because you're desperately just trying to get them food so they can hold the line where they are. And there's just only so many roads, and there's only so much security you can put on those roads. And the Ukrainians are popping out of the woods every once in a while and destroying 15 or 20 trucks and tanks and security vehicles. And now your guys are starving at the end of that line. So that is the really big thing. There's a fundamental thing of warfare has just changed, in that an individual with about 20 minutes of training can blow up a modern tank fairly easily. And so that's where we are now. And that's where the Russians moved for a week at most. And they spent the last 2 weeks trying to use the gentle phrase, unfuck themselves, because they've got too many guys out there. Their armor's now been chewed up. I mean, they've lost 1,350 vehicles of various sorts, including about 300 tanks in the last 3 weeks. That's unbelievable. And I mean, their losses in manpower is probably about 6,000 or 7,000 men. That's dead.
Like, whatever that number is, last time we talked, and you've heard me say this, like, I was having a hard time believing it, but now there are more sources on it, and it does put it, even if it's over 4,000, and I've seen figures way over 4,000, but I think that it's, what I'm doing is I'm looking at through the lens of someone who paid close attention to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, had a lot of veteran friends, met and interviewed Gold Star families, had a transparent press, and the impact of those lost lives on how they affected the war effort in the U.S. for Iraq, Afghanistan, obviously Vietnam, coffins coming home. People keep saying Russia, they can control, Putin can control media, but they can't control those coffins coming home. You can't hide that and deny that. And I'm just not sure how true it is. If the numbers are this high, how do these families, how does the public in Russia react to that? That's a crazy amount of people to die in 20 days or something.
Right. Well, a couple things impact this. Number one, most of these guys that are dying right now, the families don't know yet, right? They call it Cargo 200, which is the code word for a zinc coffin with a guy in it. And the Russians, from what I'm reading, are storing a lot of the bodies in Belarus and in the DNR and LPR, so that they're not going home to Russia yet. So they're trying to hold off on people finding out. On the other hand, Russia's military communications are so fucked up that they haven't blatted out the cellular system in the Ukraine itself. You can still use a cell phone there, which is crazy. Russia has the capability of killing it. They're not, I'm pretty sure, because they're dependent on it themselves for their military communications. It's the only reason that would make any sense. And so what you're going to have happen, and what is happening, is Russian soldiers they were told, most of them, to give up their cell phones before they went into the Ukraine. Most of them had to turn their phones in. But of course, you loot a house in Berdyansk and you find a cell phone there that's working, you're going to call mom, right? And so I think that for Russia, there is such an intense hold on their media right now, and they're holding off on sending coffins home. But I think people are beginning to realize what's going on. I noticed in Putin's speech today, he went in some pretty crazy directions, talking about people betraying the country and how the country needed to be purified of these foreign thinking elements. The pressure is beginning. It's not there yet. It's not what it's going to be in 6 months. And we'll see what it does. But I can tell you, Pete, I mean, say that they lost 6,000 men, which I think is a middle of the road call right now. 6,000 men dead probably means another 18 to 20,000 wounded. So you have an army of 180,000 men, and 25 or 6,000 of them are either wounded or dead. That means that you've lost 12% of your army, a little more than that. Those guys are the frontline guys. And in a modern army, there are not a lot of frontline guys. Almost everyone's logistics, support, artillery, etc. The guys who kick in doors and shoot people, that's a real small portion of a modern army. And I think the Russian army is exhausted of those men right now. I think they've used them all up. And so looking forward, I mean, I think what the Russians are going to try to do is one last big lunge at Kiev. But I think the edge of their army has been completely worn off. And that's going to be real interesting for the future.
let's talk about the no-fly zone situation. There's been so much conversation about it. But first, I think I shared it on Twitter. I don't know if you saw this. Somebody made a cut-up, an edit of the White House briefing reporters just hammering the question about why doesn't Biden do more, basically insinuating kind of an escalation. Why doesn't he escalate the war? Why doesn't he do more kind of militarily? And obviously this no-fly zone Chuck Todd question, it's a relevant and fair question to ask, certainly as things change and develop. What is the difference, between chemical weapons and a nuclear, at what point do you get into the no-fly zone? All this stuff. I'm uncomfortable. What I'm trying to say is I'm uncomfortable with some of the questions being asked, the way they're being asked. It does seem like journalists are rooting for an escalation of war, journalists not understanding what it would mean when they ask, what would happen. And I feel, do you feel that at all, or am I?
I think they're assholes, frankly.
Okay.
And yeah, so don't worry. You're on this side of the angels on this one. I saw this really thing that just annoyed the hell out of me. It was David Axelrod saying like, "Oh, Zielinski's going to give a speech tomorrow, and we'll see if that pushes the needle on a no-fly zone in Ukraine." And I'm sitting there thinking, like,
was he was he referring to the speech that Zielinski gave today to Congress?
Correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it was like one of those things, like, this is a question of war and peace and a potential nuclear escalation. You don't think of this in terms of like sort of petty partisan bullshit in Washington. We elected the president to be a commander in chief. Thank fucking God we elected one who actually is good at it. Can you imagine if Trump was in this office, right? But we elected this guy to do this job, and he has a lot more information than we do. And that may bother people that the White House knows more than they do. But in situations where two nuclear-armed powers who are really at each other's throats are fighting a very direct proxy war, you have to be careful, and it should not be one of those things that we bat around like Willie or Woney and make it almost like a fucking clickbait thing. Where we are right now, we've already escalated enormously. I mean, the Russians are looking at their 25,000 casualties and saying, Jesus fucking Christ, the Americans trained the Ukrainians to do this, armed them with the bullets they're firing at us, and are giving them ground tactical intel every single day to make them even more efficient. If that's not a really incredibly big escalation, I don't know what the fuck there is other than nuking Moscow. I mean, we are very actively getting a lot of Russians killed right now. Our government is. And I agree with it. It's the right thing to do. But to then turn around and say, oh, man, we need to have the MiGs, right? The MiGs are ridiculous. The MiGs from Poland that were supposed to be delivered, and then it got turned down by the U.S., actually. Those planes are big on necessary logistics and would have almost no effect on the battle. And yet that was like the cause celeb of the day. It's ridiculous.
Our military analysts saying that MiGs fighter jets would not have an effect on a battle. By the way, I did want to wonder about that. I don't know if you're the right person to answer. You seem to know a lot about military tactics as well. But the difference between anti-artillery guns on the ground that can absolutely reach, high altitudes where fighter jets would be hiding. What's the difference between having tons of batteries of anti-artillery versus fighter jets to take control of the air? And by the way, you don't blame Zielinski. No one blames Zielinski for asking for a no-fly zone, for asking for jets, for asking for everything he's asking.
Pete, when you're in his situation, you ask for fucking everything.
Yeah.
Okay? He's in an existential fight with a more powerful enemy. He's going to ask for everything, and he should. What you brought up was the anti-aircraft systems, like SS-300s, et cetera, et cetera.
I was thinking of the NC-17, but...
Yeah, exactly.
Remember that?
So you want systems that make it more difficult for the Russians to be able to bomb, strafe, shoot down things, etc. But if you give them 29 MiGs, right, you bring the Ukrainians, when it comes to the imbalance of air power versus the Russians, from being down about 10-1 to being down about 9-1 or 8-1. It's not that big of a difference. Whereas if you give them the longer range, higher altitude anti-aircraft assets, that forces the Russians to fly slower, and where we've given the Ukrainians 10,000, 15,000 short-range handheld ones. So by giving them those bigger systems, those more long-range anti-aircraft systems, we still deny the Russians control of the air just as effectively as we would if we gave the Ukrainians 75 fighters, 100 fighters, but for like a much smaller logistic tail. It does the same thing. It does it a lot more efficiently. And if we're going to win this, if the Ukrainians are going to win this, we have to support them efficiently. We can't just throw shit at them and hope it turns out okay. The other thing about those MiGs or about a no-fly zone, and this is the same topic in effect, is that I'm going to go back to the idea that you have two nuclear powers that are right at each other's throats, and one of those nuclear powers just got 25,000 soldiers in the other one killed, okay? You need to show that power, if you're the winning one, quote unquote, that there are limits to your escalation. You have to show them that you know restraint. And a really good way to do that is to say, no, we're not doing MiGs. We're going to limit what we do. We're not going to do a no-fly zone. This is beyond the idea, by the way, that a no-fly zone is the dumbest thing in the world for describing that, or dumbest way to describe that. A no-fly zone is very specifically, we're going to be shooting down Russian planes, and they're going to be shooting down our planes until we take combat control of the skies over Ukraine. It's not going to be an excuse me, back up, Russia. We don't want you there. The Russians will fight for that space. And so a no-fly zone is very specifically saying we're going to war. And anyone who doesn't want to believe that is a fool. And that, of course, applies to half the people you're seeing in the national media sitting in the White House press room and saying, why won't you help the Ukrainians? It's ridiculous. The American people don't want to go to war, a shooting war with Russia, which will very likely go nuclear. And anyone who tells you different is lying to themselves or lying to you.
New York Times writes, as Russian troop deaths climb, morale becomes an issue. Officials say more than 7,000 Russian troops have been killed in less than 3 weeks of fighting, according to conservative U.S. estimates. Bill, right. I'm still having a hard time with the number.
So here's what's going on. Okay.
How are they all dying? Where are the pictures and the videos? In past military conflicts, I think I'm not going to say it was easier to keep track of wounded and KIA. I don't know. It just seems like it's hard to get in there. I don't know.
So you're not seeing the parts of the country where it's hard for the Ukrainians to get into. Okay. And so I think where they took most of their losses are along the line in the southeast, where there had been the line of confrontation earlier. I think outside of Kharkiv, and I think northwest and northeast of Kiev. And that's country where that's Indian country for the Ukrainians. They raid in, pull out, raid in, pull out. The Ukrainians also are magically, it's astonishing to me how effectively they're using their artillery against the Russians. And what they're doing is putting commercial drones in the air to use as spotters. And then they're shooting, instead of shooting off an entire, rack of artillery, and the Russians are then able to quickly figure out where that is and go and kill that artillery unit, they're shooting off like 4 or 6 rounds, and then they're moving immediately. And they are killing a lot of Russians with artillery at a distance, which is what the Russians are supposed to be doing to them, which is like the Ukrainians have just turned this all upside down.
Well, they are doing it to them, but not the
soldiers, though.
Right.
Right. The Ukrainian military is definitely taking losses, but nothing like the Russians. And the Russians also have a lot of conscripts who are the guys who are running those supply lines. So, the really high class, and I will say on the first 3 days, the Ukrainians obliterated the elite of the Russian army. They obliterated the Russian airborne guys. All these guys that were trying to do like a thunder run into Kiev got massacred. But since then, I think it's mostly been the guys in the supply chain. You get me and you riding a truck, and we got 3 months of training in Omsk fucking 9 months ago. And we're driving a truck full of guys down the road, and we get hit in the nose with a javelin, and everybody bails out of the truck, and there's an ambush, and everybody gets killed. I
bet you that will happen specifically with you and I here at the Civil War in about 10, 12 years.
Exactly. Yeah, in the Battle of Bethesda. Yeah. But I have seen pictures of 40 or 50 Russian soldiers killed in one engagement.
I haven't seen anything like that.
It's out there. I do not share it. but it's out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think that'd be a sick and creepy thing to do. But
what do you think is let's just come home real quick, probably the least important, but certainly an interesting and important discussion, not unimportant, the domestic conversation. Zielinski speaks today in front of Congress. You've got the Putin wing of the Republican Party, both in Congress and right-wing media and in the kind of grassroots of conservative Americans. We can talk about how that might be changing, although it seems like Tucker Carlson is not letting up in his propaganda from the Kremlin, it would seem. Certainly it's replicated. Whether or not they're in cahoots doesn't matter. But it matters, but does it? So what do you think of the speech today? What's going to be the conversation with domestic politics? This is a fascinating thing for folks who pay close attention to politics to see where Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and conservatives, and somewhat apolitical, if there are Americans, are thinking about this and taking sides and interests in it. And obviously, the central point seems to be gas prices here at home. That's how we're most directly affected. Gas prices, of course, having an effect on everything else. But what do you think about the American political conversation, where we're at here on, mid-March of 2022 after Zielinski speaks to a U.S. Congress, and how the media interprets it all?
I think that there's a bit of a sea change going on right now. I think that the appeal of Putin for a lot of reactionaries in the United States was that he was a quote-unquote winner, right? And they are looking in American politics for someone who's going to give them easy answers. It's why they like Trump, right? Someone who will appeal to their sense of their own special snowflakeness and whiteness and whatever, and give them answers they don't have to think about. And I think Putin was sort of their foreign version of that, and that's why they liked him. Well, Putin right now has been proven, I think, to anyone who's paying even the slightest bit of attention, to be just a murderous asshole, but also to be a dumb one. There's an old line from the French Revolution, worse than a crime, a blunder, right? Like, it's one thing to commit a crime. It's even worse if in that crime you'd make an enormous fucking mistake. And that's what Putin has done. And I think I see it in the media that I'm looking at. Carlson can't really back out, because he's literally on TV saying, he was saying a week and a half ago, or 3 weeks ago, I should say, he was saying, I'm rooting for Vladimir Putin, flat out saying it. So I think he's sort of stuck, and that's why he's sticking to his guns. But I don't think that there's a lot of support. I think this really is a bit of a sea change. I mean, you can look at the polling numbers. Republicans hate Putin now just as much as Democrats do, or almost exactly the same level. So I do think this is different. And remember, going back into history, we had a really big pro-German Bund in the United States up until Pearl Harbor, right? So it's not unusual, it's not exceptional, it's not strange that the reactionaries in the United States love the reactionaries overseas until those reactionaries start killing pregnant women in Mariupol, right? On TV. Does that make sense?
I mean, it's hard to predict how the right will interpret and what they will see. But I just think that, and I know this might annoy people, and it might seem petty or something, but I think that it's the reason why you started your answer is we're seeing change is because these are white people. They're mostly Christian. You can't support Russians over Ukrainians or Ukrainians over Russians if you're an American. Like, you have no idea the difference between the two. If you're American,
I'll tell you, Yeah, I will tell you though.
You historically hate Russia. If you're an American, and it's easy to argue, it should be easy for people. But the bottom line is, if you're one of these people on the right who kind of supported Putin's aggression and his toughness and his whatever it is, his anti-gayness, his fake Christianity, all that stuff, at Trump's support for him and all that bullshit that they created, this persona. But then he's, as you just said, he's killing pregnant women and bombing hospitals, and today a theater where people were hiding. Yep. Like how do you, at some point, I think you're gonna think there's something's wrong with Russia and Putin. I think it's confusing for people who supported Putin or gave him a pass at worst.
You know what's interesting to me though about this one? with some big exceptions, like
it's white people killing white people. I'm sorry to minimize it, but it does matter,
right.
I think.
Well, no, but so here's something interesting. I've noticed that with the GOP right now, they're basically uniting as a political party. They're uniting against Russia, with some exceptions like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, etc. Right?
That woman on Fox. You paying attention to her? Rachel Campbell.
Complete clown. But you pointed out in your show that who's that clown that sits next to her? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name.
Kilmeade sounded like a genius.
Kilmeade was 100% right. And I can't believe that sentence just popped out of my mouth. But Kilmeade was 100% right.
Yep.
Now, that tells you something, though, because Kilmeade would normally love to say something that would make the base happy, and he still loves to say things that would make the base happy, and that tells you where the base is. That Kilmeade gets the memo. He's been there a long time. He knows what he's doing. So Kilmeade's like looking at her going, what, are you, an idiot? 80% of her office thinks, of her audience thinks that Vladimir Putin is fucking awful. What I've noticed, though, that's interesting is, to me, the horseshoe of our politics, the real far left, the Greenwalds, and then the Nick Fuentes people, right? The Groypers and the Greenwalds. Let's coin a phrase.
Well, the Greenwald's far left and Nick Fuentes is far right.
Yes, Nick Fuentes is a white nationalist.
And that's the horseshoe. Jimmy Dore is up there now.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore, Michael Tracy, Matt Taibbi, you pick. All these folks, they are so what they are, they're become the other thing on some level. But it really, particularly the people on the left, seem to have a really hard time with this. On the charge that you made, that, oh, shit, people only care about this because it's white people. And I thought Terrell Starr did a great job of writing about this in a couple different places, that what we're watching right now is a classic battle of colonialism. This is colonialism to a T. And the only reason that Americans don't see that is they don't know their Russian history, and they don't realize what an enormously intense colonial power Russia has been for 500 years. And so I honestly, I get it. People are going to be more freaked out about the dying child who is white. Some level of people will be that way. But the right way to look at this is the last gasp of sort of 19th century colonialism. That's what this is. And people on the left should hate that as much or more than people on the right. The hypocrisies that are out there, of course they exist. But this is a fight against colonialism, pure and simple.
The comparison that a lot of people are smartly making is Syria, where Assad dwarfed only his father in slaughtering like 10 times as many people. How many has it been? The refugee crisis, and he's destroyed a beautiful country, Syria. And Putin was there for the whole thing, dropping chemical weapons, looking the other way, supporting him. And, certainly Americans cared about that. But it was Syria. It seemed like a foreign land. And I just think this is a fair comparison to make. It's still Putin, and except it's Ukrainians. And I keep thinking about the Syria because of the refugee crisis and because of the numbers of dead and because it destroyed that country and because of Putin. I keep making that comparison. Others are obviously as well.
Let me give you a personal anecdote about that. So when things got shaky for the government in Syria, for Assad's government, I actually ran into a couple of Syrians who were like these really like beautiful kids who were so psyched they were going to go back to Syria, join the revolution, and change Syria into democracy. And that's the last time I saw them, and I have no idea whatever happened to them. And nobody I know who knows them knows what's happened to them. That is personal to me, right? I mean, I know people that I suspect are either badly damaged or dead who went back there. But I will tell you this. Syria's situation is not because the United States thought, they're too brown for us to help them. Syria's situation is that geopolitically it wasn't important enough. Now, does race involve some of these things? Sure. But this is not, what's happening now is not happening because people went, they're blonde, we got to help them. The geopolitics of it are so profound, the outcomes, the potential dangers of it are so profound that governments in Europe and the United States just had to do it. I mean, you've seen a revolution in the way Germany and Finland and everybody else is behaving. And to the point, by the way, this isn't the first time that Putin attacked Ukraine. Last time he did it in 2014, we didn't do shit, really. And so if the argument is that this is all about race, well, was it racial in 2014 when we didn't do anything?
Well, I'm not making that argument, and I don't think it's not all about race.
Right.
I'm talking about the interpretation of the American and other foreign, publics. But I do think there's a difference that I just, didn't make that I should make, which is Assad killed his own people, and Putin has invaded his neighbor, a foreign, a sovereign nation, and that has happened throughout history. Rulers killing their own people and invading other countries. It is certainly different by that nature in terms of it's an easier conflict in some ways to understand in terms of Russia invading Ukraine versus Syria killing its own people. Not to mention the fact that it was really hard to get cameras, much less NGOs, into Syria, and it hasn't been hard in Ukraine. I think it's been well documented, the savagery in Ukraine, and harder to document to the point where people like Jimmy Dore, said that there were barrel bombs being, things that were happening and who was responsible for them. You could basically create your own story, and you can't with this.
Yeah, there's also a couple big differences. The Ukrainians are unified under one leader who is really great at doing this, A. B, the United States had time to prepare the ground of the information war, as I said before, and also to the Biden administration was running from capital to capital to capital in Europe for like 8 months before the Russians invaded. So a ton of groundwork was able to be done in this case that, nobody really was prepared for what happened in Syria before it happened. And here, this time we really were. The other thing is that this is a war in Europe, and a big war in Europe, not a little war in Europe. Wars in Europe tend to get out of hand. They tend to kill millions of people, and they tend to turn into global wars. And that is a pretty fucking frightening prospect to me. I mean, I wouldn't say that we're close, as long as we don't do a no-fly zone. And I can tell you there's no way the Biden administration is ever going to agree to that. Okay?
You don't think, no matter the pressure? What about if they use chemical weapons?
Nope, they won't do it. Chemical weapons are going to be fired by artillery.
If they drop a bomb 1 mile into Poland, then that's a NATO thing. No?
Patriot. Well, they can certainly defend NATO territory, but for instance, the chemical weapons thing, right?
Yeah.
Those chemical weapons are not going to be dropped by planes. They're going to be fired with artillery shells. So that no-fly zone is going to suddenly turn into an airstrike zone of ground troops, and then you're in the war 100%. Even if the no-fly zone doesn't somehow turn into a hot war, once you start hitting the Russian artillery positions that are shooting the chemical weapons, well, who the fuck are we kidding at that point? We're in the middle of the war. If Russia launches tries to launch an airstrike over the border into Poland, we'll shoot their planes down. But that's not the same. That's still Russia escalating and us showing restraint. The thing we don't want is we don't want to get to the point where Putin says, you know what, I'm dropping a tactical nuke on Kiev. Right? And by the way, that doesn't win the war for him. It would be idiotic for him to do that. It doesn't get him what he wants. But we want to keep away from that sort of escalation, and we don't want to give the Russians any real justification to do it, or even any fake justification. Right. We defend, we show restraint, we help the Ukrainians cut Russians' soldiers' throats in the night. And we keep doing that until the Russians just can't support their war.
That was a very graphic and brutal thing that you just said.
I think that's the sort of thing that's happening. I mean, the mayor of Melitopol in southern Ukraine, he's the guy that you probably saw a video of him being grabbed.
Yeah.
Well, the Ukrainian Special Forces somehow did what they called a special operation. They got him away from the Russians somehow.
They did?
They did.
When?
That happened this afternoon.
Wow.
So they are not talking about it. I suspect it was Russians getting their throats cut in the night kind of thing. So
you have any reason to believe that? I mean, listen, the brutality of war is the brutality of war. But if you're killing innocent civilians, and those civilians are your neighbors, your friends, and your family,
hey, I pity every single Russian soldier there who is not bombing children, who is not, killing civilians, who is not doing terrible things. There's a lot of those guys in that Russian army. they're just poor bastards who got conscripted.
Do you think the guys who are firing the artillery know that they're targeting civilians? Do you think
I do. I don't think that. I mean, they know they're not being given a military target. They're being told. I mean,
right? They know the targets. They don't just get the coordinates.
Yeah, well, they're given coordinates, and if they look on the map, it's downtown Mariupol. And sure, I'm sure their commanding officers like, right. Oh, the Ukrainian Nazis have their headquarters in that apartment building.
Right.
But even if you knew that, that doesn't justify it.
Yeah, right? There's also a daycare there. Right.
Right, exactly. So these guys know. I got to tell you, if I were the Ukrainians, and I think that they've done a little bit of this, I would be very clearly saying, Russian artillerymen, there's a bounty on all of your heads.
Yeah.
Right. I mean that because those guys do know, and the guys who are doing airstrikes that are getting shot down, they've admitted they knew they were hitting civilian targets. But but again, the average poor bastard.
The Russian pilots admitted they knew they were hitting some.
They did. One of the pilots who got captured after he was shot down is a guy infamous in Syria for hitting civilian targets, and there's even pictures of him standing there with Assad.
Really?
Oh,
I think I saw that. I did see that. Yes, he's fat.
He's a fat
pilot. I remember just being like, "Wow, that's weird. That pilot looks a little bit overweight for a pilot."
He's a portly gentleman who's probably going to be hung by the Hague. So,
tell me the name of a source, a writer, somebody that you would suggest to folks listening. Anybody you like that you have been enjoying their analysis there?
I really like Ben Judah. Ben Judah on Twitter has been quite good. There's not a lot of good, sort of academic or books to read about this because this is a fairly unprecedented situation. But it's Ben Judah's at @B_Judah, Judah, on Twitter. And I think people should follow him, sort of big picture stuff. I think that Julia Yaffe is totally killing it with her, not on the military side of it, but sort of on what's going on in Russia and, what's going on in Ukraine. She's definitely got her finger on the pulse of sort of the ring of people who are just outside of the inner ring of Putin's folks in the Kremlin. I don't know. Do people want all the weird and crazy military stuff that I follow? Probably not.
No, but if you ever wanted to make a list, I'm sure some people would definitely link to it. I would put it in the post. I mean,
if you follow me on Twitter, you're certainly going to get a lot of that because I try to repost the stuff I think is sensible.
No, for sure. Yeah.
I do think is it
at Bill B in DC in case
that's right.
Anyone listening?
Mark Hertling on. So Mark Hertling
Bill's a
on
real
CNN.
Bill could be a real dick on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I called Nick Fuentes today a Vestal fascist.
Well, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. You're a dick to people who are not white supremacists.
I'm a dick to Eli Lake for sure.
Although I don't know what a Vestal. I'm looking at that tweet. What is a Vestal fascist?
So in the Roman Empire, they had the Vestal virgins who were the priestesses.
Oh, he's a virgin. This guy is famously never had sex with a woman, Nick Fuentes.
Exactly. So I called him a Vestal fascist, which Rick Wilson liked so much he retweeted it. Which is pretty funny.
Would never make fun of a guy for not having sex. You're not that kind of jock, but you will make fun of a fascist white supremacist who hasn't had sex, and I agree with that. I approve of that.
I will make fun of anyone who tries to make a fascist ideology out of the fact that they're such dickheads that girls won't talk to them. And we're not talking, these guys are not, these are not guys who therapy would help them. They're misogynists and douchebags.
Hey, I completely agree with you, obviously, and support it. I want to talk a lot more about media, Russian media, RT, the American supporters. Let's maybe try to make time next week to do that and just focus in on that, maybe send some things to read, because I think so much has changed with that. I mean, from small timers like Lee Camp being shut down off of RT. And
fuck him too, by the way.
Yeah. When what's happening actually in Russian media with, there's a lot to talk about there. So let's do that next week if you can.
Put a pin in it. Absolutely.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
All right. See ya.
All right, there he goes, at Bill B in DC. Follow him on Twitter right now, and he has an awesome Twitter feed. It's absolutely worth it to you if you're a listener, you're listening to me right now, and you look at Twitter, you got to follow him at Bill B in DC. There you go. And of course, Aaron Carroll, an amazing conversation there. Thank him. Thank you to Garrett Sever. Thank you to John Carroll, to Pete Coe, to everybody who supports this show with a paid subscription or even listens to it. And by the way, if you listen on Patreon, it didn't upload yesterday. And if there's any issue ever with downloading the show, just email me right away, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and say that there's an issue, and I will get to it because I am my own producer and assistant producer and everything else, and problem solver, so just let me know. But just another request to listen to it on one of the apps that charts the numbers. So go to iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or even YouTube, and you can listen to it there, youtube.com/standupwithpete, where the show posts every day as well, so that we get the downloads and the numbers. Please listen there and not on Patreon if you can. If you really prefer it, listening to that on that player and you're a subscriber, do what you will. But then just go subscribe to the show on one of those platforms and let it download to your phone every day, and then you can erase it if that's an issue or doesn't do it on its own. Okay, sorry. Thank you very much for listening. John Carroll, take us out.
Better stand up, show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.